These are the small towns and fine landmarks we have ignored for too long. There are two old courthouses in Natchitoches. One from 1940 features Art Deco Indians. Just next door is a still older one. Think turn of the century. On the second floor of Natchitoches' older courthouse, you'll find a library of genealogy materials, from birth records to real courtroom dramas.
Well, this is a court order. It's dated Friday morning, the 20th of August, 1790. The court met, and it was a state of North Carolina plaintiff against the defendant who was convicted for horse stealing. It therefore ordered that the said Elias be confined in the public pillory for 1 hour.
Is that all? I thought they hung horse thieves.
Well,
they were liberal in Natchitoches, huh?
Well, he also got...
They let him go.
He got a public whipping.
Oh, he got a public whipping? Well, I would hope so.
There are many abandoned stores on the east bank of the Red, south of Natchitoches. This one was built holding up the porch with well drilling bits. You probably wouldn't notice them unless you're looking. Do we notice anymore the faded signs, the rusted plows, the incredible links to our past that litter this land? Amazement can be found by the side of the road in Bermuda. One corner, one mass of unpainted wood, one hunk of disappointment. Regret for what? Shakespeare said beauty is also in that which survives. It's moments like these that I'm really glad you're with us on these tours of Lost Louisiana, because this looks and feels exactly like it must have felt 1,000 years ago when the Coushatta were hunting and fishing here. It's a small bridge on Highway 1220. Try to find it on the map over Bayou Theo. This is what the tourism folks like to put on their posters and brochures, of course. Some of us here have a tendency to think that maybe we shouldn't, that maybe we'd get more Yankee invaders that way, this time as tourists. As we head downstream, the Cane River is a reminder of how many times, even since Europeans arrived here, how many times the Red has changed its mind. Try and hug the Red on a drive down the smallest of paths. The Cane will deceive you. It was once the Red, but it's cast off now. The roads get smaller and hug the banks even tighter. Then they back into some mighty small corners. These are places seen only by the people who live here. Cotton bales dry tall in the ripe fields, just as it seems they always have. It's time for the harvest, and the fields are white unto harvest. Somewhere among the dry cotton and spiderweb-thin farm roads is a little town dampened by the Cane River and its many bayous, Clutcheville. In this area, a woman from Missouri set some stories that are now called some of America's finest literature. Kate Chopin poured out unpopular honesty about women's lives in Louisiana after the war. This is the landscape she drew on as inspiration, the old French settlements of the 1870s. Stories about the ruined lives of Creoles after the war.
There were acres of open land, cultivated in a slovenly fashion, but so rich that cotton and corn and wheat and cocoa grass grew rampant. The Negro quarters were at the far end of this open stretch and consist of a long row of old and very crippled cabins. Directly back of these, a dense wood grew and held much mystery of a witchery of sound and shadow and strange lights when the sun shone. Of a gin house, there was left scarcely a trace.
Though Kate Chopin lived along the Cane River for only 3 years, this place remained in her memory, and she remains in ours for documenting life in this area more than a century ago. The Rochelle Cemetery is a fine old one. Of course, there are a lot of fine old cemeteries along the Red, but how many from so far back are still growing?
The grave of E.J. Vallier has ceramic knobs on the gate, and they're frozen shut.
Mexico, and it is very much off the beaten path. There are times trying to follow the red that you can come up against the limitations of smaller roads. Backtrack you must, but that's all right because you could see something you missed on the way in, like a bridge, an old hidden bridge in the woods. That tells you there's an even older road paralleling your journey and lost somewhere in those woods. Across the red again to Montgomery, and another cemetery in sight of the river. This one is on a steep hill. From here you can see the exact spot in the river where the Eastport sank. It was a Union ironclad, and it's still out there on the sandy bottom. Montgomery looks like a tiny town today. Of course, it wasn't built for today. It's the exact size of a Red River trading town of the last century. The width of the streets, the style of the buildings let you see the last century.
Montgomery may still seem to be something of a small town, but before the Civil War, this was a big shipping port. In fact, Union General Nathaniel Banks, when he's taking his campaign of northern aggression, as they called it, up through Confederate North Louisiana, well, after he shells the town of Montgomery, he personally gets out and leads a raiding party to first loot, then burn every house in town.
At least the local people got a good laugh a little later when Union Admiral Porter was making his hasty retreat south on the Red. He tried to save his precious ironclad, the Eastport, but couldn't, and instead of letting it fall into rebel hands, Porter scuttled his own boat right here at Montgomery.